The Sunday sun spilled across my kitchen counter as I slipped into my dress, smoothing the fabric like it was a shield. This wasn't just about looking good. It was about survival. Helen's family lunches always felt like battlegrounds, and today, I told myself, would be different. The sweet scent of vanilla clung to the dessert I'd baked, my peace offering wrapped in sugar. I looked in the mirror, practiced a smile, and whispered, "Today will be different." But deep inside, a knot of unease pulled tighter. Every detail mattered. The pearl earrings weren't just accessories, they were proof I belonged. The mascara, the careful sweep of blush, the dress that hugged my figure in all the right places. Nothing was accidental. Helen never hid her disapproval of me, always dragging Victoria's name into the room like perfume that wouldn't fade. Victoria, the ex, the family's golden girl. I wasn't going to let her ghost dictate how I walked into that house. Today, I would be seen. As I tucked the dessert into its polished carrier, my heart beat with two rhythms at once, determination and fear. What if Helen found a new reason to sneer? What if my efforts dissolved the moment I stepped through her door? Still, a flicker of stubborn fire burned inside me. I believed, no, I needed to believe, that one day the tide would turn. With sweetness in my hands and dignity in my stride, I locked the front door behind me and stepped into a road that felt lined with both promise and peril. The moment I pulled up to Helen's house, my stomach tightened. The place looked exactly as it always did. Perfectly trimmed hedges, roses lined up like soldiers, the front door gleaming as though it had been polished just for this occasion. I carried my dessert like a fragile promise, forcing my smile into place. The closer I got, the louder my heels seemed to echo on the pathway. It wasn't just a house I was walking into, it was a stage. The door swung open, and there was Helen. Her lips stretched into that tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Mariana," she said, like my name itself was an inconvenience. Her gaze swept over me from head to toe, weighing, judging, measuring. I handed her the dessert, hoping the gesture might warm her just a little, but she accepted it as if it were nothing more than a duty fulfilled. "We'll see if they like it," she muttered, already turning away. My chest pinched, but I kept my head high. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and garlic, a feast spread across the long dining table. Relatives murmured, glasses clinked, laughter bounced from one corner of the room to the other. I plastered on my best version of confidence, moving carefully through the crowd. Maybe today, just maybe, they'd notice me for who I was. But before I even had the chance to breathe it in, my smile froze at the sight waiting for me at the table. There she was, Victoria, sitting at the table as if she had never left, her posture relaxed, her smile bright, like she belonged more than I ever did. My blood ran cold, though my face stayed frozen in that polite expression I had practiced. Helen's voice rang out across the room, cheerful now in a way she never was with me. "Look who decided to join us! Isn't it wonderful having Victoria here again?" My throat tightened, but I swallowed it down. Victoria stood, gliding toward me with that effortless grace that always made people forgive her too easily. She kissed my cheek lightly, her perfume invading the space around me, sweet and deliberate. "Mariana," she said softly, as though she were the one doing me a favor by being here. The room's chatter dulled, my pulse thundered, and for a fleeting second I wanted to vanish. But I didn't. I couldn't. I met her eyes and held the smile that now felt like glass cracking. The table filled with laughter, Helen fussing over Victoria, Andrew shifting uncomfortably beside them, not daring to intervene. And me? I sat down, carefully placing my napkin in my lap, my hands trembling beneath the linen. It wasn't just a meal anymore. It was war, unspoken, simmering, and already underway. I told myself to breathe, to endure, But deep inside, a sharper thought whispered, this was only the beginning. From the moment we sat down, it was clear whose spotlight this lunch belonged to. Helen's eyes sparkled like she'd been waiting years for this reunion. Every word out of her mouth dripped with affection for Victoria. The daughter I always wanted, she cooed, her hand resting on Victoria's arm as if she were royalty gracing us with her presence. I sat across from them, my fork idle against my plate, my smile tighter by the second. Victoria played her part flawlessly, humble, sweet, all sugar on the surface, but sharp enough to cut me with every line. Oh, Andrew used to love when I cooked his favorite dish, she said, her eyes flicking to me like a dagger disguised as a glance. I wonder if he still does. The table chuckled, Andrew included, his nervous laugh making my stomach twist. He didn't even look at me. He didn't defend me. He just let her words hang there, glowing like a crown over her head. Inside, I felt myself shrinking, invisible in plain sight. The food on my plate blurred, my appetite gone. Every laugh at her little comments felt like a slap, each affectionate pat on her hand another reminder of how unwelcome I was. Still, I kept my posture straight, my chin lifted. If they wanted a show, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. At least, not yet. Helen leaned in closer to Victoria, her laughter spilling out like champagne. You've always had such a special place in this family, she said, her tone dripping with pride. Every sentence felt like a dagger twisted in my chest. She didn't even try to hide the comparison anymore. I could almost hear the unspoken words. Why couldn't Andrew have chosen you instead of her? My hands pressed harder against my napkin to keep them from trembling. Victoria, ever the actress, tilted her head just so, pretending modesty. Oh, Helen, you're too kind. I just love being here. It feels like home. Her words wrapped themselves around the room like ribbons, binding everyone to her charm. She even reached for Andrew's arm lightly, just enough for me to notice, just enough to remind me of the history they shared. He smiled, sheepish and flattered, as though the past were a joke they both understood, and I never would. I kept quiet, chewing slowly, though the food might as well have been ash. The chatter around me blurred, but my ears caught every word aimed to slice at me. I felt like a ghost at my own table, stripped of voice and presence. Yet deep in the hollow ache forming in my chest, something sharp began to stir. Not tears this time, but the faint spark of anger, a quiet promise that I wouldn't let them keep me small forever. Victoria raised her glass, her smile perfectly poised. Too old memories, she said, locking eyes with Andrew as though the toast were meant only for him. The table erupted in clinks of glass and warm laughter. I lifted my own glass, my lips curved into something polite, but inside, I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. My husband smiled at her words, not mine. His silence spoke louder than anything he could have said. When the laughter died down, Helen reached across the table to squeeze Victoria's hand. You'll always be part of this family, she said proudly, while her gaze slid past me like I wasn't even there. That was the moment it hit me. Not just the humiliation of being ignored, but the cruel intention behind it. They weren't simply reminiscing. They were reminding me of my place, or rather, the lack of one. That night, when the house was quiet and Andrew drifted to sleep beside me, I let the tears fall. But they weren't the weak, hopeless kind. They burned, carving paths down my cheeks, reshaping me in the process. By the time the pillow dried, sorrow had transformed into steel. I promised myself that I wouldn't just endure. I would fight back. And the thought of revenge, sharp, deliberate, almost intoxicating, began to take its first breath inside me. The morning after that lunch, I woke with swollen eyes and a hollow chest. Andrew moved around the bedroom, humming softly as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't let me drown in silence at that table, I watched him button his shirt, his hands steady, his face unreadable, and I wondered how long he had been practicing that calm mask. A thought gnawed at me. There's more to this than just a cruel lunch. When the door closed behind him, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. My mind replayed every smile, every glance between him and Victoria, every approving nod from Helen. They weren't coincidences. They were signals, breadcrumbs meant to humiliate me. And once that realization took root, I couldn't ignore it. If there was truth hiding in the shadows, I was going to find it. So I started small. Receipts crumpled in his jacket pocket, late-night phone calls that ended the moment I walked into the room, social media posts that lined up too neatly with his absences. I began to notice the patterns, the little lies stitched together into something larger. The deeper I looked, the clearer the picture became. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was evidence, and it was piling up fast. Late one night, while Andrew showered, I scrolled through his phone with trembling hands. My breath caught when I saw her name. Victoria. Texts threaded like whispers in the dark. Can't wait to see you again. Last night felt just like old times. My stomach flipped, but I kept scrolling, forcing myself to read every word. There it was, confirmation of the betrayal I had already felt in my bones. I snapped screenshots quickly, my fingers steadying as I worked. Proof. Finally, proof. It was strange, almost empowering to hold their secrets in my hands. The words that once cut me now became weapons I could sharpen. I saved them all, creating a quiet archive no one could erase. I wasn't going to confront him yet. No, timing was everything. A few days later, I followed the trail further. Credit card charges at hotels we had never visited together. Receipts tucked into his wallet, bearing dates that matched his so-called late nights at work. I even found pictures online, Victoria smiling in places Andrew claimed he'd never been. Piece by piece, the puzzle fell into place. They thought they were careful, but they had underestimated me. And that was their biggest mistake. Once I had enough proof, I didn't explode. I grew quiet. That kind of silence frightens people more than shouting ever could. I walked through the house as if nothing had changed, cooking dinners, folding laundry, smiling when Andrew cracked his hollow jokes. But inside, I was building something far bigger than confrontation. I wasn't going to yell or beg. I was going to expose them. That's when the idea came. A family lunch, this time at my house. The suggestion rolled off my tongue with practiced ease, sweet enough to disarm suspicion. Helen lit up at the thought, thrilled I was finally making an effort. Andrew agreed without hesitation, never guessing he was walking straight into my carefully laid trap. And Victoria? Naturally, she was invited again. It had to be her. I prepared more than food. I printed the screenshots, the receipts, the photos. Tangible truth they couldn't twist. Each piece slid into a folder I tucked away like a secret ingredient for the perfect recipe. I could almost see the scene unfolding. The table, the laughter, the moment when the mask would drop. They had written me off as invisible. Soon, they'd discover just how visible I could be. The day of the lunch arrived, and my house had never looked more inviting. Candles flickered softly, the smell of roasted herbs drifted through the air, and the table gleamed with polished cutlery. I made sure every detail whispered warmth, because appearances mattered. They needed to walk in feeling comfortable, unsuspecting. My heart beat steady, not from nerves, but from anticipation. This wasn't just a meal, it was the stage I had built for truth. Family trickled in, their voices rising with laughter and casual chatter. Helen arrived, glowing with her usual pride, her arm looped around Victoria as though she were escorting royalty. Andrew followed close, balancing bottles of wine, his smile effortless, unbothered. Watching them slip into my home, into my space, I felt a strange calm wash over me. They had no idea what waited behind the walls of my practiced hospitality. As plates filled and glasses clinked, I moved among them like the perfect hostess, smiling, refilling, listening. Helen praised Victoria's grace, comparing her charm to mine as though it were a competition I had already lost. Victoria, of course, laughed softly, playing innocent while savoring every glance my husband gave her. And me? I kept my smile steady, my voice smooth, my hands calm. Because I knew the real course of the evening hadn't even been served yet. Helen's laughter rang across the table, her hand resting on Victoria's as she declared, "This family just wouldn't be the same without you." The others nodded, some politely, some eagerly, and I felt the heat of humiliation rise in my chest. But instead of breaking, I leaned into it. I let her words fuel me. I reached for my wineglass, stood slowly, and cleared my throat. The chatter softened, eyes turning toward me, expecting small talk or maybe a thank you. "Family," I began, my voice steady, almost warm. "It's supposed to be about love, about loyalty." I let the words hang in the air, thick and deliberate. I saw Andrew shift in his chair, his smile faltering, and Victoria's brows lifted ever so slightly. Helen smirked, certain I was about to embarrass myself with some sentimental speech. They had no idea. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass, and the calm in my chest turned sharp. "And since we're all here together," I continued, letting my eyes travel around the table, "this feels like the perfect moment to celebrate honesty." My pulse thudded, but my face betrayed nothing. I reached for the folder I had tucked beneath the sideboard earlier, sliding it onto the table with a quiet thud. Curiosity flickered in their faces, but only I knew what was about to unfold. My smile grew as I prepared to serve the truth they'd been choking on in secret. I opened the folder slowly, almost ceremoniously, and spread the contents across the table. Screenshots, receipts, photos, each one a stone cast into the silence. Gasps broke out, the sound sharp and raw. I watched Andrew's face drain of color as he reached for the papers with shaking hands. Victoria's lips parted, her composure faltering for the first time all evening. Helen stared, frozen, her pride cracking like glass under pressure. "These aren't rumors," I said evenly, my voice cutting through the chaos. "They're facts. My husband, his ex, and the mother-in-law who welcomed it." My words didn't tremble, and I didn't raise my tone. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough. Around the table, eyes darted, whispers rose. Cousins, uncles, aunts, they all saw it now. The deception, the betrayal, the ugliness that had been dressed as family tradition. Finally, I looked at Andrew and Victoria, meeting their stunned silence with a smile as sharp as steel. "You can both stay for dessert," I said softly. "It'll be the last one you ever share with this family." My chest felt lighter than it had in years. I didn't just expose them. I had reclaimed myself, right in the space they had tried to erase me from. And as I sat back down, the room remained suspended in the shock I had served. The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst could have been. Helen's cheeks flushed a deep crimson as whispers spread like wildfire across the table. One aunt shook her head, another cousin muttered something under her breath, and I caught the sharp look of disappointment aimed directly at Helen. For once, she wasn't the proud matriarch. She was the woman who had sided with deceit, and now everyone knew it. Andrew tried to speak, his voice cracking, but no words came out. His hands trembled as he shuffled through the photos, proof he couldn't deny, no matter how badly he wanted to. Victoria, still trying to recover, forced a weak smile, but the room had already turned on her. The admiration that once followed her like perfume was gone, replaced with disgust. Even Helen couldn't conjure a defense. The evidence had spoken louder than blood ties. I sat there, calm and steady, my heart finally quiet. I didn't need to yell or scream. The power of truth had done the work for me. For the first time in years, I felt seen not as the outsider or the wife who would never measure up, but as the woman who stood her ground. And as I looked around that table, I realized the war I'd been forced into was finally over. But my liberation? That was only just beginning. In the days that followed, Andrew tried to salvage what was left, but the damage was already done. Relatives whispered about him at gatherings, his once solid reputation reduced to a cautionary tale. At work, word spread faster than he could contain it, his polished charm now clouded by shame. Papers soon followed, divorce papers, and I handed them over without hesitation. Watching him sign his name felt like the final nail in the coffin of a life I no longer wanted. Victoria fared no better. The family that once adored her turned cold overnight. Invitations that used to flow so freely dried up, her messages left unanswered. The seat Helen had once reserved for her remained conspicuously empty at dinners, a silent reminder of betrayal's cost. Her smile, once effortless, became strained, and her presence a burden rather than a gift. She had fought to crawl back into this family, only to be cast out with finality. And Helen. Oh, Helen could no longer hide behind her matriarchal pride. Her choices had left her reputation scarred. People no longer saw her as wise or protective. They saw her as complicit. The respect she once commanded dissolved into pity, into judgment. For years, she had compared me to Victoria, belittled me, made me feel small. But now, it was her turn to shrink under the weight of eyes that no longer admired, but condemned. Months later, I stood in my own kitchen again, but this time the air was light, not heavy. The table was set, not for judgment, but for celebration. My birthday lunch. Friends and family who had chosen me filled the room with laughter and warmth. Candles flickered, glasses clinked, and I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. No tension, no silent comparisons, no knives hidden in smiles, just belonging. As I moved through the room, serving food, hugging relatives, I caught sight of the one chair left deliberately empty. The seat Helen had once reserved for Victoria sat untouched, a ghost of a battle already won. It wasn't bitterness that kept it vacant. It was closure. A reminder that I had endured their cruelty, exposed their betrayal, and walked out stronger than I ever imagined I could. I raised my glass, smiling at the people who truly mattered. My voice didn't need to be loud to carry weight. His mother invited the ex to the table, I said softly, letting the truth settle in the air. But I was the one who served the final course. And in that moment, surrounded by love I had fought to protect, I knew liberation wasn't just about leaving. It was about reclaiming the seat they once tried to take from me.